Yá'át'ééh. Good morning, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. Today is November 1st, believe it or not, and I am here with my second cup of coffee. I've been nursing it all morning because I am getting ready to talk to you about the apology that President Biden gave for Indian boarding schools about a week ago when he was at the Gila River Indian Community in Arizona. And I wanted to talk to you about that apology because, as you know, I've had a little bit of experience with apologies, right? In 2009, I hosted a public reading of the apology that President Obama and Joe Biden buried in the 2010 Department of Defense Appropriations Act. It was a 7 point apology, bullet point apology. It offered mentioned no specific tribe, no specific treaty, no specific injustice. Said you had some nice land. Our citizens didn't take it very politely. Let's now just call it all of our land and we'll steward it together. Then end with a disclaimer saying nothing in there was legally binding, right? So that apology was never announced, never read, never publicized by the White House or by Congress. I sent a letter to the White House asking them to send someone, preferably even President Obama, to come, or Joe Biden or whoever else might be available to come to this reading. And got a letter back from the White House saying that President Obama nor anybody from his White House would be at our event. So when I heard very last minute that there was going to be an apology, I think I heard it on Indian Country Today late last week, like Wednesday or Thursday maybe. Actually, someone texted me, I think it was on Thursday, or even Friday morning, maybe it was Thursday afternoon, that there was going to be an apology for boarding schools at the Gila River Indian Community just outside of Phoenix in Arizona. And unfortunately, I had a fairly busy schedule that day, and so I wasn't able to watch it live, but I did go back and watch it later. And I did watch it again even this morning to kind of go through and think about this apology and what to make of it. But anyway, so that's going to be the discussion today. So I literally have been nursing this cup of coffee all morning as I've been listening to this apology again, reading the transcript, and just kind of gathering my thoughts about how I want to talk about it this morning with you over my second cup of coffee. So, as you know, or let me begin just like I always do by acknowledging I'm back at my home in Washington or Washington, D.C., and these are the lands of the Piscataway. And so I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbling it is to be living, moving, breathing, eating, living with my family on these lands today. So, Yá'át'ééh, my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. Let me see who's on this morning and who's here. Mr. Phil Fox, Yá'át'ééh. Good to see you. Thank you for joining this morning. Larry Robinson, actually it's afternoon. I keep saying Yá'át'ééh, but it's afternoon. It's about 12:40 here in DC, so it's not even morning anymore. Larry Robinson, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining me. Juan Balde, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining today. It's good to have everyone on here. George, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining today all the way from Washington State. You'll be happy to know, George, I just solidified some dates in December where I'm going to be in the Seattle area. And so I'm going to be traveling to Seattle. I think it's the weekend of like the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th of that month. And I'm setting up several different events in the Seattle area that week. So I'm very excited about that trip that's coming up. Yá'át'ééh, Lefty, and Russell, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining. Jessica, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for being here. Oladeja, good morning. You're in California, so yeah, I know it's morning for you. Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining this morning. It's so good to have everybody on here this morning. I'm grateful for you. And let me go over a little bit of my schedule before. First of all, there's something I want to let you know, which is I know for the nation, next week, Tuesday, is Election Day. and there's going to be a lot of attention focused on the election and what's going on with that. And that's an important day. I encourage everyone who's able to please take time to vote, participate in the opportunity to be a part of our democratic process here. So I encourage everybody to vote. But Tuesday is also the 5th anniversary or the 5th birthday of Unsettling Truth. It was November 5 of 2019 that Unsettling Truths was first published. And so over the next week, we are going to be doing some celebrations and some remembering of Unsettling Truths over the past 5 years. We'll be sharing some social media posts. Next week, Thursday, on November 7th, I'm actually going to have Sing-Chan Ra, my co-author, on as a guest with me on my second cup of coffee. We'll be talking about 5 years since we published Unsettling Truths. I know one post that my assistant has been getting ready is she's asking people in the post, I think we're going to post it over the weekend, to list what are some of your favorite, our most significant unsettling truths that you learned from the book. And we'll ask people to share those on social media, and then Sing-Chan and I will talk about some of the more significant ones when we do our second cup of coffee next week, Thursday, on November 7th. But anyway, so there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out. Watch my social media for the next week, and we'll be posting some things, pictures and memories and thoughts about the book. And anyway, and we're also going to be using the hashtag Unsettling Truths Turns 5. So let me actually put that into the chat so you'll see that. But we're going to use this hashtag Unsettling Truths Turns 5 for the kind of stories and posts we're going to be sharing this week of Unsettling Truths. And as always, if you want to get signed copies of Unsettling Truths, you can purchase those on my website. You can get either a single signed copy, or you can get an entire, sorry, I missed something here, or you can get a book study special, which is 10 copies of Unsettling Truths from my website. And when you order that, I will give you a free 45-minute virtual Q&A at some point over the next year that you can schedule with me through my assistant and give your book study a virtual Q&A after you've had a chance to read Unsettling Truths. And I just posted a bunch of Patreon updates in the past few days. So if you want to know how to continue to support my work, I'll go deeper in some of the conversations that I'm initiating here. Patreon is really one of the best ways to do it. I engage on there almost every week with posting different presentations or doing Q&As, going more in depth with things. And so if you would like to follow me more closely and even help support some of my work, I'm very specific not to monetize most of my social media, but I do use Patreon as a way that people can subscribe to my site, and that really helps keep my voice independent. I don't like to give advertisers or even organizations influence over what I do say or do not say, and so by gaining support directly from people who are following me and are support of my work, it helps me keep my voice as independent as possible. Anyway, all of that being said, we now need to talk about this apology that was given. And I'm posting a link to the apology. This is on the White House's YouTube channel. And it is the entire presentation given, both the introductions by different members of the community there, as well as an introduction by Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Interior, and then, of course, the remarks and the speech by Joe Biden. So, first of all, probably like many of you, and I just have to be very honest with you up front, whenever the U.S. government talks about apologizing for its history, I am extremely skeptical. Not just because of my experience of what happened with the 2010 apology that was buried by President Obama in the Department of Defense Appropriations Act, but because I know the history of this country that's built on the myth of American exceptionalism. And when you believe in the myth of your own exceptionalism, it gives you very little, if any room at all, to accept responsibility for what you did wrong. I mean, President Trump, when he was running for his first term, he demonstrated this very clearly, where he went to a conference on prayer. He was asked, like, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? And he said, no, I haven't. I'm a Christian, but I don't ask God for forgiveness. I don't think God's a part of that picture. If I do something wrong, I just try to do better, but I don't bring God into my moral failings. And apparently he doesn't understand what the whole premise of Christianity is all about. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But again, Trump demonstrates very clearly he absolutely believes in the myth of his own exceptionalism, which gives him no space whatsoever to admit he's done anything wrong. And that's not true just with Trump, right? We see it with all of our presidents. Why do you think that the first apology in 2009 was buried by our nation's first Black president? Why do you think this apology that was announced seemingly last moment, like most people I knew didn't even know it was coming until, again, the first place I saw the news of it was coming from Indian Country Today. And I didn't see anything promoting it or even talking about it on mainstream media, which I stay pretty engaged in as well. And it happened on a Friday, which is right. I mean, Friday is when you release all the news you don't want to make the news, the news rotation or the news cycle, right? You put that out on Friday because Thursday night is when major stories happen, and then you have all day Friday before the weekend to write about those things. So Thursday is really a fairly big night, and Friday is like, I think on the West Wing they called it "Take Out the Trash Day." In that show, where it's just, you put all the things you don't want to talk about on Friday because everyone's trying to get home for the weekend and nothing's really going to take place over the weekend. And so they did this apology on a Friday in the Gila River Indian Community in Arizona. And so that was the first hint that I got, the fact that I didn't even hear about it. Most people didn't hear about it until maybe a day before, or even not even until the day after. Some people didn't even know it happened until it actually happened. I think my father, who again stays fairly in touch with these things, texted me the day of. I think he texted me Friday morning and said, hey, did you know there's going to be an apology in an hour or so? And I texted him back to, I was aware of that. And so, right, they did very little to promote it, which is striking because if you watch the presentation, when Joe Biden takes the microphone, he says, I forget the exact quote, but he said something to the effect of, what I'm doing today is one of the most significant things I've ever done as president. And I was like, really? I would think you would be much more on top of what felt like the most significant thing you've ever done as president. I don't think it would be buried in a Friday news cycle, not even talked about by the major networks. It didn't seem like, it wasn't presented, it wasn't planned, it wasn't announced as if this was the most single important event of President Biden's political career. He said it was, but he did not act like it was. And that was, to me, that was disappointing. So again, I need to be, I go into these things skeptical because I've seen the way our nation does not know how to acknowledge the injustices of its own past. And it does everything it can to bury those things. And even when it does acknowledge them, it does it in a way that it doesn't become a part of the major story. And so those were disappointing things to me when that happened. When I watched the apology, I'll be honest, the beginning, I forget exactly the video I posted, the link I posted to the video, it's about 43 minutes long. I think President Biden starts talking around the 20-minute mark, maybe 22-minute mark. I forget exactly where it is. But I will give him some credit because in the first maybe 7 to 10 minutes of his remarks, he was fairly honest about the horrors of the boarding schools. He was fairly honest about those things. He talked about the injustices. He talked about the trauma. He talked about the abuse, including, I think he even mentioned the sexual abuse. He talked about how this was a very dark page on American history. He said several things during the first part of his presentation. I think it was around the 26-minute and 22-second mark. He said, "That's why I've committed to working with Indigenous communities across the country to write a new and better chapter in our history, to honor the solemn promise that the United States made to tribal nations, to fulfill our federal trust and treaty obligations. It's long, long, long overdue." I appreciated many of his words that he spoke up to about the 29 or 30-minute mark of the video. His apology, which I think came most directly at the 27-minute and 30-second mark. He said, now he didn't actually say he yelled, "I formally apologize. As President of the United States of America for what we did, I formally apologize. It's long overdue." Those words are meaningful. I'm very curious why he chose to scream them, but the words sound meaningful. And then at the 29 and 54 minute second, 29 minute and 54 second mark, he said, "As I've said throughout my presidency, we must know the good, the bad, the truth of who we are as a nation." Again, I appreciate those words. At the 31-minute and 55-second mark, he said, "That's why I've committed to working with Indigenous communities across the country to write a new and better chapter in our history, to honor the solemn promise the United States made to tribal nations, to fulfill our federal trust and treaty obligations. It's long, long, long overdue." I appreciated those words, coming especially from someone elected President of the United States of America. Now, in my humble opinion, the tone leading up to that point should have been much more solemn. I think President Biden could have been a bit more sensitive and humble as he spoke. And I think he should have stopped at the 32-minute and 7-second mark. I think if he would have stopped there by saying we need to honor the solemn promise of the United States that we made to Native nations to fulfill our federal trust and treaty obligations, it's long, long, long overdue. If he would have stopped there and walked off the stage, that would have been incredibly meaningful. But he didn't. He didn't stop there. He went on for another almost 10 minutes. And I should have been prepared for this, right? Because in the quote I read earlier, the quote he gave at the 29-minute and 54-second mark, when he said, "As I've said throughout my presidency, we must know the good, the bad, the truth of who we are as a nation," that wasn't the end of that part. Because he went on to say, and I'm going to actually show you these quotes here. He went on to say, "That's not what great nations do. We're a great nation. We're the greatest of nations. We do not erase history. We make history." Right? I should have known he was going to go off the rails after he said that. Again, It's very, very difficult to apologize when you believe in the myth of your own exceptionalism. Right? Whether you're saying make America great again or you're saying America's great already. At some point, you just have to acknowledge we weren't great. We made some serious, serious moral failings. We did something that no nation, even the most despicable of nations, never should have done. And then after, again, I said he should have ended at the 32-minute and 7-second mark. But he didn't. He didn't stop. And after that mark, over the next 10 minutes or so of his speech, I counted 9 specific I statements, not just using the word I in reference to himself as reasons, but I statements talking about how great he is. He said, I've appointed Native Americans to lead across the federal government. I signed a groundbreaking executive order to give tribes the more autonomy. I have restored and designated multiple national monuments in honor of tribal nations. I secured the first ever advance funding for Indian health services. I took the case challenging the Indian Child Welfare Act all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won by reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, an act I took great pains in writing 30 years ago. I bestowed the Medal of Freedom on a Native person. I knew a lot about Jim Thorpe before some of you probably even knew. Now, he's not talking to a bunch of Midwestern white farmers here. He's talking to Native peoples who we, trust me, President Biden, we were well aware of Jim Thorpe within our communities before you were. I bestowed 2 other revered medals on other Native peoples. Again, the problem I have with this is President Biden was apologizing for an incredibly dark period of American history. We're not even talking hundreds of years ago. We're talking 50 years ago. The last of these boarding schools closed in the 70s and 80s, the 1900s. While I was alive, talking about children being removed from their homes, placed in military-style boarding schools, punished for speaking their languages, punished for practicing their culture. If you've ever sat and listened to the stories of boarding school survivors, it is gut-wrenching. It is gut-wrenching. Again, I appreciated how bluntly he acknowledged some of the things of the past. But then when he ended his speech by affirming the myth of American exceptionalism, by affirming white landowning men that don't worry, you're still great, you're still the greatest of all nations, and then by seemingly separating himself from the failings of his country, the country he leads, by talking about all the great things he's done for Indian country. It's hard to trust the sincerity of your apology, Mr. President. And on top of that, and I realized this just the other night, when we were in Albuquerque at the World Indigenous Business Forum, and we had shown the documentary I'm a part of, Bad Indians hiding out in Antelope Canyon, and that documentary deals with the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Native nations, the genocidal policies of Abraham Lincoln, and the history of boarding schools. And as we showed that documentary, there were in the audience many delegates at the conference from Canada who were there. And during the Q&A, they talked about how even just hearing some of these things are triggering, and expressed that there needs to be great concern to care for people in audiences like this who are triggered because they had experience like these things happen to them. And President Biden, was talking about events that are monumentally triggering for so many Native peoples. And after apologizing, when he went on to affirm the myth of American exceptionalism and trumpeting the things he's done for Native Americans in Indian country, he essentially turned this apology into a campaign event. He didn't specifically say vote for Harris Walz, but he turned it into a campaign event. And people had to applaud. They had to applaud, right? And so people are cheering and applauding a white landowning male from the upper echelons of the 1%, who is so proud that he's the first white president ever to acknowledge our nation's despicable history against Native peoples. And then he still affirms his nation is great and they're the greatest of all nations. And then he talks about how great he is. That's not an apology. It doesn't give your victims any space to acknowledge the significance of what's happening there. When you have to immediately pivot after a first-time, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching apology, and then turn and cheer for the man who's delivering that apology, that's shameful. That's shameful. President Biden, you should have ended at the 32-minute and 7-second mark. You should have walked off the stage in solemn silence with your head hanging for what your nation did. But you couldn't do that, could you? And Republicans, don't you start thinking that, our Trump would have done better. Bullshit. My heart broke for the survivors who were in that audience, who had no space to feel the wave of emotions that were being brought up by this event, and who were forced, compelled to applaud for the man who represented the nation, who caused the trauma that they experienced. My heart broke. This is the problem with the lies our nation tells itself. This is the problem with having a bipartisan value that believes in the myth of our nation's own exceptionalism. This is the problem of having a dehumanizing doctrine of discovery written in the foundations of our nation. This is the problem with believing in the heresy of promised lands. Is none of these things give this country any space whatsoever to acknowledge the things they've done wrong with any level of sincerity. Joe Biden couldn't pat himself on the back hard enough for being the first president to do these things. As I said, Republicans would have done no better. So don't go thinking this is a partisan problem. This is a bipartisan problem. So those are my thoughts, my relatives. My heart broke. He should not have done this a week and a half before the election. He should not have turned this into a campaign event. He should have announced it globally long before he did. He should have made this into an incredibly solemn event. And he should have stopped with the apology and not gone on to pat himself on the back for how great of a white landowning male he is. So it's strike two. The apology that was buried in December 19 of 2009, that was strike one. The apology buried in the political news stories of this election and delivered at a campaign event is strike two. United States of America, federal government, our next president, whoever you might be. You can do better. And our Native peoples, especially our boarding school survivors, deserve better. My relatives, I think we can accept this apology. I don't think we can accept it. It was not delivered in a sincere manner. We deserve better. And our nation can absolutely do better. Those are my thoughts. I hope these are helpful, my relatives. They bring up a lot of emotion in me, as you can tell. I'm kind of feeling a lot of these emotions right now. And the reason I'm feeling it is because when I go out and speak, when I talk on a public stage. I know I'm speaking for boarding school survivors, among many other people who have been rendered voiceless throughout our country. And I feel very, very deeply saddened. I feel very deeply saddened that this history and these events and these emotions and these traumas are not more effectively acknowledged. So you can hear they're jackhammering right outside of my office. So it's a bit noisy all of a sudden. But anyway, I thank you, my relatives, for joining me. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine has been. I wanted to give you one other update. Next Saturday, on Sunday, November 10th, I'm going to be traveling to Minneapolis, and I'm preaching at Calvary Baptist Church in Minneapolis at 10 a.m. on Sunday, November 10th. For those of you in the Minneapolis area, I welcome you to come attend that service. I think we're even going to have a Q&A afterwards at the church, and they also stream their services online. So if you go to their website, you can find where they stream their services, and you can watch it there if you're not in the Minneapolis area. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And as I said earlier, I don't have all of the times yet, but I will be in Seattle December 12th through 15th. In Seattle, Washington, and in that area, I'm going to be doing something at the Seattle School of Theology, something at Rainier Church, and something at New Life Church, and maybe another one or two events we're still trying to plan. So anyway, if you're in the Seattle area, I am going to be out in that area December 12th through 15th, and I would love to find a way to get people to as many of these events that I'm going to be at as possible. So please follow me on social media to stay up to date on what's going to be happening during that trip. My relatives, thank you for joining me. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.